Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor Emma Mulvaney-Stanek of the City of Burlington, and we are reviving our Mayor's Show to talk about issues facing the City of Burlington, both opportunities and important updates as we continue to move the city forward in so many different important issues. And tonight, or this afternoon, I'm really excited to be able to introduce to folks, if you haven't met her yet, our new director of our Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Office, Dr. Kelly Perkins. And we'll have a good, robust conversation this half an hour to talk about the REIB office, what we have planned for it under her new leadership, and just a little background actually of Dr. Perkins, who is known to many people in our community, but I've been so pleased to have her join our senior leadership here in the City of Burlington, not just for leading the REIB office, but really being one of my senior advisors to help just direct and advise on all the issues the city is facing and the policy work that we're trying to advance around community safety, ample and affordable housing, and climate resilience. So Kelly, welcome. It's nice to be able to interview a department head too. It's kind of like this cool bonus moment as the mayor to have like a little talk show kind of moment.
Absolutely, I love it. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So Kelly, why don't you start by giving folks at home just a little sense of your background and even your interest for being interested in this role with the City of Burlington.
Sure. I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio, but folks ask me where I'm from is a really loaded question because I've lived in 11 states in Washington, D.C. The first time I left home, I was 14. I went to boarding school in Massachusetts, and I have been floating around the United States of America since, in many places across the world. I think for me, I first came to Burlington in 2017 working for the University of Vermont. I had someone who saw me present at a conference and they were hiring for a Res Life role and came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, to think you might be interested in this, we'd love to have you." And University of Vermont at that time had a really strong reputation for social justice and through their higher education student affairs program. And so I, as a student affairs professional, was like, wow, this is like the holy grail of student affairs work. And so I hadn't been to Vermont. It was the only New England state that I hadn't been to yet. I've lived in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Connecticut. So I said, well, guess we're going back to New England. So left in 2020 for really just other career opportunities. And I ended up back in Burlington in 2024 during the pandemic. I met my husband, who is a resident of Burlington. Somehow we knew all of the same people, but had never met. And so, here I am. When we decided it was time to merge our lives, it was a no-brainer for me to come back to Burlington. I feel like this place really grew me professionally. I felt like it was a place that was extremely welcoming. I think there are a lot of just cool opportunities that Burlington and specifically, but Vermont in general, has because of that small size, and I feel like have benefited from being in this mighty small state. So I'm glad to be here. So far as REIB, I've been running away from DEI work, I think, for a really long time. Being the person who's responsible for it, it's a huge responsibility, right? When the totality of your work is people and trying to really help people to understand how to build bridges across difference, right? How do we come together with our various identities, our various lived experiences, our different understandings of the world, and make a life, make a city, right? Make a state. It's hard work. And so I think for me at this particular time in American history, it just felt like the right thing. I've been an educational administrator for about 19 years. Coming back to Vermont, had a career change, moving into the HR space. And so I'm really excited to take the totality of everything that I've learned to date and to really use it to help better our city, to advance our equity work, and to really develop a strategy that will sustain us and that is bigger than whatever's happening in the United States, right, in our country, bigger than what's happening at the state level, but where we can say that we are a place where if you come here, you can make it. My husband's from New York City originally, and so we joke that New York City, you know, people are like, oh, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's like, well, what, are you all going to beat me? Like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Right? But I think for me, Burlington is a place where if you are here, you can make it. And I really want to be on the front end of helping to advance that and make that a reality that anybody who lands here can thrive, can live the life that they see for themselves.
I love that, Kelly. And I think when you put yourself forward as a candidate, when we were doing the hiring process for our permanent REIB director a few months ago now, it was just so great to kind of see your combination of skills, your combination from your student life and higher ed experiences where you did so many trainings and engagement with folks, both students but also employees, to really talk about what does equity and inclusion really mean, like when we really get to the core of it. And then of course your HR background was just an added bonus, frankly, because people are at the core of really understanding that it's about relationships in order to build those bridges you were talking about, right? And deeper understanding and exposure and ability to kind of work through conflict and work through and move systemic barriers and frankly systemic racism that has really entrenched a lot of the issues for why we even need an REIB, especially in these times, right? And I was also just talking to a neighbor in the Old North End around the other piece around, especially right now with what we're facing on the federal level, making, you know, inclusivity and making sure that everyone feels they can belong in Burlington, regardless if they just got here, regardless if they were born in this country, regardless if they've been here for multiple generations. And it's such an important piece for every senior leader in the city to hold, and every resident for that matter. So I also appreciate what you're saying around, you know, we're trying to get away from it because often for the last several years it has been one DEI director in charge of everything, and that is an impossible job. That is not sustainable, and that's actually, in my opinion at least, not the right way to do that work, because it should be everyone's responsibility to be understanding equity, understanding what that really truly means, and then applying it to their piece of the organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. When I work with students would often tell me they would get so frustrated with their peers, right? And they would say, you know, Dr. Perkins, why is this person so ignorant, right? Why do they believe things, you know, things that were deemed negative about poor people or Black people? And I used to ask my students, I said, well, how old are you? It's like, I'm 14, I'm 15. How old is your peer? They're 14 and you're 15. Who do you live with? I live with my parents, right? You all like, they can't help that. Well, there's social media, Dr. Perkins. Well, everybody is not using social media the same way. Everybody doesn't have the same lived experience, and that's not to excuse any behaviors, right, that really make other folks feel like they are not welcome, they don't belong, or not included. But this is all learned behavior, right? People don't wake up racist, they don't wake up classist, they don't wake up xenophobic. This is learned behavior. In the same way that you learned that behavior and internalized it, you also, with guidance, with support, right, because we learn in community, you can also learn to embrace people in different ways.
Yep. Well, and also to be honest about our history, to be honest about institutions, including the City of Burlington as an institution, our schools, our employers, and understanding that in Vermont in particular, there are reasons why places are so monolithic, you know, in terms of who lives here, and especially along racial identity lines. And to be honest enough to ask the questions like, why is that? Like, why is Vermont either the second or third, we always sort of change rankings, the third or second whitest place in the country? And it's very purposeful. It's not by accident. And so often we find folks who are Black or brown who come to Vermont and then turn around and leave right afterward, because it can be a very hostile place to exist, because workplaces, as you were saying, folks are just not doing the work to really understand their piece of it, to educate themselves, to challenge themselves, and to be you know, open to learning and open to feedback about things they might have learned growing up that have racial underpinnings to it or have bias related to it. We all have bias. It's just the way the science brain works, you know. But for at least the City of Burlington, not only as a large employer, but as the city, we really want to sort of, what's the word, plow? No, I'm going to use plow because it's wintertime. Okay. Plow a new path to be able to really talk about the importance of this work and its permanency in the city structure. So one thing, I'm going to jump around our questions a little bit. One thing we have started, and I think this is such an important moment to honor the work of the first directors of REIB, which actually even before we had our first formal director, Taisha Green, we also had Wanda Hines, who has been a longtime activist and then city employee who led a lot of the very early work, and Patrick Brown, who's been a longtime leader in this community as well. Richard Kemp, who I had the great privilege of meeting when I worked at the Peace and Justice Center when I was like a tiny little nonprofit worker right out of college. He used to have a show here on CCTV and now has a beautiful center named in his namesake. All of these folks have sort of created the seeds for which Burlington finally was able to get to the point of resourcing and formalizing an office of racial equity, inclusion, and belonging. And now we're at the point of chartering. So the charter, again, for folks who are not familiar, is sort of like the city's constitution. It is the most difficult governing document for the city because it needs to be. It's sort of the permanent way we will structure the framing of how we prioritize how we operate as a city. It names how we organize ourselves structurally as a city and what positions are needed. They will always exist, basically. And so we have begun that process of putting the REIB office into our city charter. And it is a process that the City Council unanimously supported and I signed as mayor to put on this town meeting day's ballot, so March of 2026. So I was wondering, Kelly, because you and your team have led that process of some community engagement around what does that charter language look like? What, in general, like the most big picture kind of way, what will voters see on the ballot conceptually around what is being added specifically to the charter? Like, what do we mean by that?
Absolutely. I would like to think of this particular charter change, or any charter changes really, as saying that we're going to embody as a city, we're committed to embodying the work of this office, right? And so not just paying lip service to DEI work, to advancing racial equity, but we're saying we're going to do it because it is in our charter. We are literally saying this work is foundational to how Burlington runs as an entity, right? And I think that is super important because what that means is that as the tides change, as our country goes through its ups and downs, we are committed to doing this. And not only are we committed to it, we're going to do this as Burlington. We are going to be a place where folks can see themselves here and they can actually actualize belonging. Because belonging is the part that you do. That's the internal work, right? Folks can be inclusive and you can still feel like you don't belong, right? But really, we need to be able to have the building blocks to get there for people to belong. And to me, that is what this charter change will do. Things that you'll see in the language, that we're going to be really a consultative body, right, for city offices, but really for the region, right, around best practices, around advancing equity, particularly racial equity, advancing inclusion, thinking about how we navigate conflict, right, how we partnering with HR, right, to think about how our people systems, right, also impact employee belonging in the city, working with community organizations, right, making sure that folks are celebrated, that they're acknowledged, again, that they feel like Vermont is a part of their story, but they don't have to erase every other part of their story to be a part of the Vermont story. And I think for me, this is a really exciting time to come into this office and to be in a place that's saying, we're going to do this regardless of what is happening around us. You know, sometimes it feels like we're like the kingdom of Vermont. But I do think this is one of those times where we are on the front end of the change and really being leaders, and I just feel honored to be able to serve in this capacity at this time.
Yeah, which is great, because as I said, there's so many people we are collectively standing on the shoulders of. So Director Taisha Green was the first formal director of RAIB, and the concepts of having this permanent office were really articulated then through partnerships, of course, with Mark Hughes, director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and Christine Hughes, the director now of the Richard Kemp Center in the Old North End, among many other partners, to be able to say and finally articulate what do we mean about this work exactly and formally. And I think the other part that in particular is important to me that this charter also speaks to is the importance of conscious work to make sure we diversify representation, both in the elected roles, and there's many appointed roles in the city of Burlington. So we have many commissions. I think I've lost count. I mean, like we're talking 20, 30 commissions and advisory boards that support our 14 different city departments, and in some have significant authority. Our Department of Public Works Commission, for example, has some level of regulatory authority over how we decide where streets and sidewalks will be fixed, and really starting to understand kind of making sure that everybody has a seat at the table and that we're diversifying these roles, both on just in terms of equity and access in particular, because we want to make sure that all those bodies, including the mayor's office, represents the diversity of our beautiful community. And so that's not only important in those formal leadership roles, but also all the way through the organization. We employ something like 700 people. We're a large employer. And as I meet with department heads, there are some very male-dominated parts of our city structure. People could probably guess at home. It tends to be trades jobs. It tends to be our line workers for the Burlington Electric Department. I think they're actually right now, unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, they're probably wonderful employees, but they're all white and they're all male. And there's not many, I think in the state of Vermont, there's not many female identifying line workers. It's a great job. It's a technical job. And thinking about like how do we intentionally, again, it's going to take intentional work, find pathways for folks to not only see themselves in these roles, but then as RAIB partners with HR for the city and then models for other towns and cities in Vermont, how do you really intentionally do that? And then, as I was mentioning before, support the retention of folks so they don't come, experience Vermont, maybe experience like how we're still a work in progress in so many areas of inclusion for LGBTQ plus folks, for Black and Brown folks, for immigrants. Make sure we work on our retention and we make sure that inclusion is felt and that belonging, as you spoke to, is felt, so people don't turn around and then exit 2 years later. So it's such important work. And the last thing I'll say about the charter, because I think it's also very important, we talked a lot about the director role. How does that role get articulated in the charter? And so we are proposing that be a permanent role in the city, that it must be in existence. It can't be something cut through a budget or a future mayor or future city council. However, that would be what we consider a public servant role, so not a political appointee. Because when you update the charter and you think about that governing document, it's so important to think about it again like a constitution. Think about every future mayor and future council and how do you protect the role so it can be effective in the real purpose of the role, which is to have continuity in government, continuity in the role itself, and not become a kind of a politicized role based on whoever might be mayor today or tomorrow.
But also a role that asks the hard questions, right?
Exactly.
I mean, what happens if every time the mayor changes, right? Or we have a regime change that then we're out of here, right? And really where DEI work is right now, part of the reason that it has been so easily undermined and attacked is because really, I think in 2020, right, when kind of corporations came on and said, okay, let's do this, right, with no experience actualizing this work, right, not learning from the academy and from organizers and activists who much of the language comes from, really in some ways deprofessionalize the kind of these roles, right? And so with that, if this role changes every time there is a new mayor, because technically there could be a new mayor every 3 years, right? And if that's the case, you could literally wipe out whole bodies of work, right? Every single time. But also, the role of this office, of this director position, is to challenge the status quo. And so that is hard work, right? For a political figure, right, to kind of sit in that work, to not, I can't just kind of get rid of this person because it feels like they're not on my team. You got to really dig deep, right? And that is where the work is, right? Being able to sit in that discomfort, no matter how deep it gets, right? I think a large part of this work also is emotional regulation, right? You're not unsafe because somebody is challenging you, right? And asking you to think deeper, to think more expansively, to think harder, to think longer. And so we really are hopeful that folks will see that while this is a departure from how most department heads are brought into the city, that it will be ultimately a great change. And really, if we are thinking expansively, are there other department head roles that should be kind of situated in that same way, right, that are not subject to the political machine?
Yeah, well, exactly. And even before we were drafting the charter language for RIB, another piece in my administration we were working on is this initiative called Modern Gov Initiative, which is our ways we can look at modernizing our government and making sure that we are rising to the needs of a modern day city. And some things that have been in this charter have been there for decades, seriously decades. And so sometimes it doesn't work anymore. And to Kelly's point, I don't know, I'm saying it in a third person. To your point, Kelly, this is a talk show. We have to go back and forth again. But we've already been talking about why is the HR director, for example, a political appointee? That would be a very important continuity of government role. Why are things like our city assessor? There's many roles that I think in other city structures they don't have as a political appointee to the mayor. It doesn't mean that every role would become a public servant, because some are important and strategic for a mayor to be effective in our form of government, which is called a strong mayor form of government, two branches of government, essentially. I don't serve on the city council. I sort of am the mini governor, if you will, which feels like a weird way to describe it. But like the legislature and the governor are two equal branches of government. Similar is our format in the city. And to be able to advance sort of and operationalize what the city needs to do, a mayor does need a team that she or they or he would be able to put in place. But I would really benefit from making sure I have also reliable continuity of government leadership roles like RIB, like HR perhaps at some point, the assessor, other things that can make sure that they just are career public servants who know the city in and out and have been here for a period of time where institutional knowledge is built up so it can benefit for the wisdom and the continuity of the city. Super dorky civic education, but I think it's very important to know about your own city.
Absolutely.
So let's talk with the remaining time we have, because there's so many different parts of what's happening for RIB beyond the charter. So every summer, I sit down with our department heads and we develop the goals for the upcoming year. And so I'm curious if we can talk about maybe just a couple of the goals for RIB as a department to support its purpose, which again is to really to advance the work of racial equity, inclusion, and belonging throughout the city and in the community, all the things we've talked about before. But specifically, what are a couple of goals that you're particularly excited about to work with your team on this year?
Sure. One of the goals that I'm most excited about, which is already getting a significant amount of traction, and maybe a little bit to my surprise, is elevating our trusted community voices, right? They are part-time members of our city government who serve under REIB and really are there to be the voices, right, for our new American immigrant refugee communities, and really wanting to elevate them so that they are able to really help folks to understand how to navigate city government, right? How to get the resources they need, how to share that information along, right? And so they are, sometimes translating, right? They are going door to door. They are bringing people, right, to meetings. But really shout out to them. They are an amazing group. And we're looking for someone who speaks Spanish, if I could put out that shameless plug, to join our ranks, but really hoping to really utilize them more because they're really spunky and really really ready to do the work that is going to make their various communities feel like they belong here. And so they're really wanting to, they have just marvelous ideas, right? And so they've gotten to talk to the city planning office so far on the comp 2050 plan, and giving ideas about how to bring their communities in to understanding, right, what this work is. I think another goal that I'm particularly excited about is thinking about how we build more community and a sense of belonging within our city government ranks. Obviously, just so many changes, particularly over the last year or so. Morale is not where we want it to be. And also for us to have a 700 plus city government workforce, we are woefully not diverse, right? And so I know for me, if I didn't work in REIB, I would rarely see anybody who looks like me, right? It's very difficult to be what you can't see, and to actualize that. And so I think I'm hopeful to be able to perhaps start some employee resource groups or whatever we end up calling them for our purposes, to bring folks together. And so thinking even beyond, right, our social identities, race, sexuality, but thinking about women in leadership, right? What would it look like for department heads to be meeting monthly with frontline and junior women identified staff members who who aspire, right, to like higher level leadership roles, and to be getting some of that informal mentorship, right, in a more structured way than I happen to meet this person and connect, right, because I got invited to a meeting, right? I think this is about employee resource groups, about bringing folks in early, often, but also they can be a vehicle for change, right? Because again, you can't have diversity of thought without actual functional structural diversity. Where you have folks all together all the time who have largely the same systemic lived experience, because I don't want to minimize anybody's day-to-day experience, but when you have folks who have the same systemic lived experience, you are going to continue to get the same results, right? You may move the needle very slightly, but you will continue to get the same results. And so we need to do things to really bring more folks in, help folks to find that voice and to kind of actualize what they want our city government workforce, what they want our city to look like.
I love that, because it goes back to, again, we have to be so intentional, right? Pipelines are built intentionally in terms of getting people into leadership, and then also making sure we elevate people from within and then draw people in so we can diversify the thought around the table, as you were saying. It's so critically important. And then one thing, right before we did this show, I came from the King Street Youth Center, and they have this great new program for high schoolers in Burlington to expose them to different kinds of employers and employment opportunities out there, as well as college and trade school and other things. And we were having a good conversation, because I said, I think the city needs to do more to be able to partner with programs like that, so that young people in our city are able to see themselves in a lot of these fields, which frankly we're having trouble recruiting anyway, but certainly tend to be male dominated. I mentioned them before about trades and whatnot. But I did a tour of the Winooski Dam, for which the city owns through Burlington Electric Department. Little factoid about Burlington. And I was talking to the dam manager, which is not his title, sorry, dam manager, but and we had to recruit him from like Rhode Island, Boston, because we didn't have any local talent, right, for that. And I was thinking to myself, how do we get the King Street youth into that dam to tour, to see themselves as possibly in this role? But again, right now, they don't see someone who looks like them in these roles. So we have to be much more intentional about exposure and encouragement, mentorship, apprenticeships, those kinds of pieces.
Especially for our youth, right? Because, Vermont, in many ways, right, because of the saga it's created for itself, is ahead of the curve, right? We have in our, Burlington School District, it's 50% of our students are students of color in the second or third whitest state, depending on the year. That is no small feat, right? And if we can't figure this out, right, if the adults can't figure this out, we are going to lose our youth, right? And ultimately, they, to me, are our first part of our pipeline, right? And so what does it look like for us to put the systems and structures in place that make them proud, that make them say, I grew up here. I grew up in a place where I see what is happening statistically with Vermont, but I didn't have this experience that was just kind of hyper white, right? I got to have an experience where I was exposed to various things. I mean, when I told my stepson we're gonna go see the mayor, he's like, "You're the mayor? Like, what are you saying to me?" I mean, I thought for me,
what do the kids do now? They do like this kind of thing. Is that right? He's gonna tell me I'm not cool, I'm sure, after that. But
for me, it's like that I felt very special,
Yes.
right? For him to understand, right, based on what he's learning in school. Oh, a mayor's really important. It's like, wow, you're connected to the mayor. I mean, how many other places, how many other entities can you get those types of experiences as a child?
Yep.
Right? Most people go visit their city hall in like 4th or 5th grade, but you don't actually get to kind of personally chat with the mayor and ask questions, right? So how do we just increase that exposure overall, and not just for, our youth, but again, also our new Americans, our, folks who are new to this place, period, regardless of how they ended up in Burlington, Vermont.
Yep. Well, and I think that just underpins how important community engagement is to this administration, to my administration, and making sure that we continue to build upon what it was really started during Bernie's administration as mayor back in the 1980s, the Neighborhood Planning Assembly, for example. But we have to do even more to reach people, to reach especially working class people, people where English is not their primary language. We have to make sure that government works for people and they see themselves reflected in that work. That's why the Trusted Community Voices you spoke to before is so important. They have become sort of an extension of advisors for me. And I've committed to meeting with them on a quarterly basis because I think their insight is so important to directly be liaisons to our immigrant and refugee communities, parts of our community, but also always being mindful of how do we make sure that leadership is accessible. The city councilors, the mayor, department heads, to everyone in the city, be it young people, but also people who often either have distrust for government or are not familiar with government, and remove those barriers so people feel empowered to vote, feel empowered to engage, ask questions, to advocate for their street, for their neighborhood. We really want this city to be a healthy and vibrant place for everyone, and that includes no matter where you live in the city. It includes if you don't even know where to vote. Like that's also why all resident voting has been an important part of expanding our local democracy. But beyond that, like how do people start to have your role and my role, right? So that we can really make sure that young people will grow up and see a mayor that looks like them, that has, someday, because we've never elected a mayor of color before, like has a skin color like them, that has perhaps a disability like them. These are all really important versions of glass ceilings that still need to be smashed so that Burlington can truly be a truly inclusive city at the end of the day. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, Kelly, is there anything else you want to bring up so that folks at home again know all the amazing work ahead for REIB, or anything else that you think that just comes to mind?
Sure. January 20th and 22nd, there are going to be opportunities for public comment on the charter change process. Please come share. We'd love to have folks, if REIB has somehow improved the quality of your life in Burlington, we would love to come share, because I don't take for granted that everyone understands or is vested in this work. And it's really one of my goals to ensure that as many folks as possible in Burlington see themselves in the work of this office. We are taking on the Aging Council, going to be working with the Sister Cities program, and just really trying to really expand and deepen our understanding of what it means to create inclusive, equitable spaces for everyone.
Well, it's a great way to end, Kelly. So thank you so much again for being on my show, for helping us get out of our hiatus and to bring this show back to CCTV. And thanks to everyone here at Town Meeting TV in particular, for helping to host this show. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.